Welcome. This is the Living a Revenue Culture podcast series. And the pandemic reminded us that businesses to survive have to create profitable revenue, and that the way they do that the best is when they optimize a people first culture. And so today on the podcast, we've got Dr. Paul Schempp, and he's a high performance leadership expert. And sometimes I'll introduce people and say, you may have heard some of this before, but since Paul is a distinguished scholar by the International Center for Performance Excellence, a senior Fulbright Scholar, a professor at University of Georgia, a corporate consultant, authored 125 plus, 6 books, 125 plus articles, has delivered over 200 presentations in 29 countries, and lectured to 24 universities on 3 continents. You may actually have heard some of this before. So I want to welcome Paul today. I'm glad to have you with us, Paul.
Thank you, Rick. It's delightful to be with you again. So let's get started. I'm excited about what we'll be able to talk about today.
Well, the first thing I would love to have you share, when you talk about high performance leadership, what does that look like? How do people recognize it when they see it?
Sure. If you don't mind, let me give you just a little backstory. I run a research laboratory at the University of Georgia, where for the last 30 years, we've tried to identify the differentiators, primarily in sports, so sports coaching, the differentiators between the people who are consistently great at the highest level of sports. So in other words, professional coaches, Division I college coaches, Olympic level coaches, national coaches. Well, the things that make sport coaches successful, those principles also apply to leaders in business. And so it's kind of bled over into studying people who are major or successful executives at large corporations. And I'll just give you a few examples: Delta Airlines, UPS, General Electric, so forth. We've also done some work in the military as well, because as you probably easily recognize, it takes great leadership and a great culture for military organization. We've done work with the Army and the Navy for them to be successful as well. And again, Rick, the principles seem to apply across the board. So that's what our research has tried to do over the last few years. So when we talk about high performance leadership, we talk about the leaders who have to perform at the highest level of their business or sport or in the military. And it's amazing how consistent we find great leadership is at those levels.
Fascinating. And, because often people don't recognize that the leadership is that important, particularly sports. We go look for who's got that superstar, and we don't think about the rest of the environment. The same thing with CEOs. Often I think we hire CEOs because they got a lot of press or they wrote a good book the last place, and we don't think about them in relation to culture. And our work is focused on recognizing that from a profit standpoint. Everybody says, well, what do I want? I want scale. I want innovation. I want operational excellence. Well, I often wonder who they think does that if it's not their culture.
Right.
And
exactly.
If those things determine success, then it seems like you got to get the culture right first. And so, off camera, you and I talked about a couple of things, culture being one and the other being purpose. And to me, those two things are linked. In your research, do those two things come up?
Oh, absolutely. There was an architect back in the 1800s. His name was Harry Stack Sullivan, and he coined the term form follows function. In other words, a building needs to be built in a way that would allow it to perform its function, whether it's a residential house or a warehouse or whatever it might be. Well, it's the same thing in an organization, isn't it, Rick? A leader has to craft the culture based on the function, or as you say, the purpose of what they're trying to accomplish. And so what kind of people do we need on board? What responsibilities do you need to have? And as a leader, how do I communicate these things with them? How do I get them to work together? And so, yeah, culture is a bedrock of a successful organization. And a leader recognizes that straight away.
Today we see more and more articles about organizations needing a purpose greater than just profit.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at companies that have survived for a long time at a high level, it's interesting how often, whether it's Disney or Apple or BMW or Southwest Airlines or people like that, there seems to be something about their culture and their purpose of leadership that's more than just a good bottom line or a good balance sheet kind of
Right.
stuff. Does the research, how does that play in the work that you guys do?
You're spot on with that, but I think the person who most made that point for me, Rick, just what you said, was Ed Bastian. Ed's currently the CEO of Delta Airlines. And I helped set up the mentoring program for the Delta pilots. One of the things that we discovered about expert leaders is they've almost all been mentored. Not every one of them, but mentoring is a key to developing leadership skills to be successful. So Ed and I were having a conversation, and we talked about culture, the Delta culture, if you will, because he recognized how critical that was, just as you just said. So I asked him this question. I said, Ed, in a word, can you describe the Delta culture? Now, if I asked you that, Rick, you're thinking about a major commercial airline, and I said, in a word, what would you think the culture would represent? What would you tell me?
I would tell you that's a hard question.
Isn't it? Yeah. Ed didn't hesitate, by the way. He said safety. And I was kind of surprised. And I said, could you explain more about that? He said, that's the key driver of a commercial airline. If people don't, and this is what he said, if people don't feel safe flying with us, they will not fly with us. It doesn't matter how low priced the ticket is, doesn't matter the amenities you provide. If they don't feel safe, they don't fly. Our culture is about safety first. Now, when you ask, does culture relate to profit? I mean, Ed got that. If it wasn't a safe airline, there'd be no profit. But again, I think you mentioned, is there a bigger issue? Of course, he's concerned about his airline passengers and the experience that they have. But most importantly, it's their safety. He feels that when somebody boards their flight, they're entrusting the entire Delta organization to get them where they're going in a safe manner. And by the way, he'll also add on time and with your luggage.
And it's interesting as you tell that story, often or too often, people don't connect the purpose with the profit that allows the organization to continue paying their team a reasonable living wage and giving them a career path to the future. And providing both safety and then career steps in there with the ongoing education that it takes to continue to grow the culture, which continues to grow the profit. And it's somehow those things get disconnected.
Yes. Yeah, I'll give you another story if you don't mind stories. Please. I could also give you the research, but I think stories sometimes are a little more interesting. They also support the research, fortunately. I had the opportunity, like you, I do some keynote speaking at organizations, and I was doing one, and I won't identify the business, but I'll say they were a major international chemical company. And it was the North American sales managers, regional sales managers, sales directors that came in, maybe about 50 people. And so I was providing the after dinner lecture. And one of the questions that I asked these salespeople, I said, if you could identify one skill, just one skill that you use as a leader that will increase the performance of your team in the next 12 months, what skill would that be? And there was silence. And when I finally said, and I knew a few people in the audience, let's say I picked out Dave, and I said, Dave, what skill would you go for? And he goes, I don't think of my leadership as being skills. He says, it's just what I do. And afterwards, the senior vice president came up to me and he says, I was shocked. He says, these people don't realize you're not born a leader. You learn to lead. You learn to build a team and a culture. If they don't recognize what they need to do to improve, our company has no future. Our company has no culture. So again, I think it makes that point really well. Leadership, no one's born a leader. You learn to do that. And that's what our research tries to do. And one of the keys is they need to build a culture that will allow them to, in most business organizations, drive revenue, drive profit. I mean, if you don't do that in a business, you're not around very long.
Yeah, and this isn't a question you and I talked about earlier, but in this conversation, I can't stop myself from asking it. My observation is that leaders in a for-profit organization have a different set of responsibilities than leaders in a non-for-profit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And if I've got 100 people in my organization and I'm responsible for their families having health coverage and lunch and all those kinds of things, I have a responsibility for my organization to survive in the short term and thrive in the long term. Where if it's a soccer team or something else for my kids, it's not so much that it has the same outcomes. Is that a real thing, or is that just kind of my observations?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Although there's more similarities than I think are differences, because what makes an organization successful in one capacity also works in another. And I'll give you two examples. You're right. In sports, it's very black and white. If you're a coach, Rick, your success is measured by one factor only. At the highest level. If you're talking about kids, it's different. Kids should be about having fun, learning good social skills, all of the things that we think young children should learn. Successful in sport at a young age, to me, is almost meaningless. But at the highest level, in the NBA, the NFL, your status as a coach is dependent on your win-loss record. If you win more games than anybody else, that's it. And in business, it's fairly similar, but in nonprofit, it's a bit different. I'm very proud to do work with the Georgia Substance Abuse Council. They approached me last year because one of their services they offer is they develop coaches, people who are going to coach people in recovery. These are former people who are recovering from addiction themselves. Now, is the mission different? In a way it is, because what it is, it's about helping people get into and sustaining their recovery. And that's what these coaches do. And I feel honored to do that. Are the principles the same? Actually, yes, they are. I mean, what's going to help somebody be successful in recovery, like motivation, for example, communication skills, having a plan moving forward. Those are having an objective or business purpose, as you say. Those are all the critical skills that are going to help somebody in business as well as in any other capacity. So yeah, I do see differences in NGOs, businesses, and sports in the military. But when you really get down to the fundamentals of what makes an organization successful, I think you hit two of the key ones. One is, what's our purpose? Yeah. And then the second is, how do we develop the culture that's going to allow our organization not only meet that purpose, but to continue to grow?
One of the things, again, this is observational on my part, but you've probably seen this in someplace. If you go out on Google and say, how many decisions does a human make in a day? The answer is going to be on Google, 35,000 decisions in a day.
Right.
And 800 of them are about food. So I get that. But, when I look at the way business is transitioning, and, people want to throw up the black swan events and say, oh, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Nothing's ever happened like this before. And I just think since the number changed on the century to a 2, we've had a dot bomb, a 9/11, a Great Recession, and now a pandemic. And if you do the math, it must kind of comes out we're in a black swan at least 1 year out of 3. And so we should get used to the fact there's this immense change coming faster and faster.
Right.
And so when I think about those 35,000 decisions or whatever that number is,
Right.
it looks like that's a way for me to continually improve my culture, because every day I need to make new decisions that either keep the status quo or go forward.
Right.
Is that a real thing?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the areas that we've studied over the years is decision making, specifically decision making under pressure. We've also studied how experts, if you will, leaders, coaches, analyze the environment. You know, Rick, you're right. We're always, if you will, in a crisis, and the great leaders thrive in those times. Thrive. I mean, that's the opportunities right there.
Yes,
and I'm going to give you an example. Chick-fil-A here in Atlanta, Georgia is where it was founded. We're all very proud of that. Did you know during the pandemic in the last 2 years, 60% of restaurants closed their doors permanently?
Yeah.
In that time, Chick-fil-A's profits went up 13%.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. What did they do differently? And I'll tell you, they did 3 things. And all great leaders recognize how to analyze a situation to be able to see and then seize an opportunity. The first thing you have to know is, what's the purpose, as you said, Rick? What's our results? What's the outcome we're after? You also have to know what influences that. And of the things that influence your outcome or your results, let's take Chick-fil-A. What influences their outcome is people buy their sandwiches, people buy their drinks, people buy their products, like most companies. So second question is, what's under my control? Because you've got to let go of things that are out of your control. It's wasted emotional energy. It's a distraction. It will not get you anywhere. If they ran around saying, oh, COVID, is closing our doors, nobody can come in, woe is me, that's not the kind of person that's going to be successful. What can they control? And I'll give you a couple of things. First of all, there are people who are indoors. Well, here in Georgia and a lot of other states, they closed that. People couldn't come in to buy the product. So why do we have our people indoors? Do they have to be? No, we can control where they are. Let's send them out to the parking lot. What are they going to do in the parking lot? They can do the same things they do indoors. They can take orders. They can take payments. And that way, when they get up to the window, they pick up their sandwich and they're on their way. And so they could control certain things. They recognize what they can control. And then ultimately, here's the third factor. What do I need to change? Of the things that are under my control that will impact my results, what do I need to change? Great companies, great cultures are always evolving, aren't they, Rick? They're always changing. And so what do I need to change? What's under my control that will influence our results? And that's how Chick-fil-A and many other organizations thrived when many people were dying in this economy.
I love that story. And I have to ask a question as part of that. As you're telling that story, I'm imagining the pandemic period and the Chick-fil-A staff being outdoors. As a customer, I think I would value that experience of a human being interacting with me as I'm purchasing, my lunch or whatever.
Right.
Was that part of it as well?
Absolutely. But that's Chick-fil-A's culture. You mentioned culture. You walk in and somebody's going to say to you, welcome to Chick-fil-A. When you say thank you to an employee at Chick-fil-A, their response is, my pleasure. Because Truett Cathy, the founder, knew it's all about the experience. Absolutely. And Rick, you and I were talking before we actually started this, what's changed in business in the last 10, 20 years, last 2 years? It's all about the experience that our customers and our clients have, isn't it? Yeah.
And I got an emotional response from thinking about being in the middle of the pandemic. And if I had gone to Chick-fil-A, I'd have had an interaction with a real human and it would have been pleasant.
Yep. Mhm.
And that was something that was missing in a big sense during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what a way to bond with clients for the long term.
Mhm.
And again, this isn't the question that we had started with, but one of the things that, as I'm listening to this story and we're talking about how we control what we can control,
Right. Mhm.
and I'm asking the short-term question versus the long-term question.
Sure.
In our work, one of the things we observe are bubble companies. You know, I grew up in the auto industry,
Mhm.
and I think the American auto industry is the best example of a 40-year bubble that probably ever existed in history. Because
Mhm.
at the end of World War II, there was only one place on the continent that could build cars. That was North America. We
Right.
fulfilled the car demand for the world for at least 30 years and trailed into the 40-year part with no competition, no judgment about is it a good car, a bad car,
Right.
you know, anything. It was a car and I could
Right.
buy one. And so it was all about fulfillment.
Yeah.
And then the Japanese and the Germans came back, and all of a sudden it was no longer about fulfillment. And so to me, the car industry was this example of a short-term bubble, a long
Mhm.
short-term, but a bubble. And so our mindset is not, our leadership is about fulfilling a demand that is clearly not, you know, long-term, you know, predictable. We know it's going to end. The bubble is going to burst, whether it's a real estate bubble or a, you know, a stock bubble or whatever. So how does leadership vary in these bubble environments versus Chick-fil-A, who certainly appears to be a long-term player?
Yeah. I hope so. You know, one of the things that tends to happen, particularly in American businesses, although I think they're starting to change those, is we get seduced by our success. You know, or another way I put it, we get comfortable with our competence. And so we've always done it this way. By the way, whenever I hear somebody say, we do it this way because we've always done it this way, I think of Kodak. And that's what I think. Well, you know, they made film for a long time, but nobody's buying it anymore. What you lost track of, and what Apple's really good at, is saying, here's what people want today.
Yep.
And so, yeah, this bubble, it's the organization has to constantly evolve. It's kind of like, if you don't mind the metaphor, it's like sourdough bread. You know, you got to have the active yeast developing it to keep developing it. You know, if you think your organization is going to be in 5 years what it is today, I don't know what kind of industry you're going to be in. You know, even the oil industries are changing now. One of my clients is the National Basketball Association, and they're looking to change. And I'll give you just one reason. People don't want to watch TV anymore.
Yeah.
If you look at most people, they want to watch something on their phone or on their tablet. They don't want to watch commercials.
Yeah.
So what is the NBA, whose 80% of the revenue comes from broadcast media? How are they going to change in order to stay relevant? And it's constant. No matter how successful you are in the past, does not predict your success in the future. I'll give you one other thing great leaders know. Because you've not been successful, because you've failed in the past, doesn't mean you're going to fail in the future.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting, as you were telling that combination of stories, the Delta story a few minutes ago, and then the NBA and people wanting to watch things on their phone. Like you, I've had the chance to travel a lot. I'm a little over 4 million air miles.
Wow.
What I find today is, if I get up out of my seat and I go to the restroom in the back of the plane, and as I walk back forward, some airlines still have the monitor in front of each seat. But a lot of airlines have gotten so they don't put any monitors in. They give you download capability on the web, and every single person pulls out, you know, a tablet or a phone or a laptop, and they're watching exactly what they want to watch when they want to watch it on this flight.
Right.
And if there's 180 people on the plane, there's 180 different devices with different shows at different points in the show going on at all times. And it's mind-blowing to me. And that to me is that example of that constant change and recognizing, what the client really wants.
Mm-hmm. You reminded me of a story, and I won't go into great detail about it, but I had the opportunity to meet Steve Jobs. It was in between, remember he got fired from Apple?
Yeah.
Yeah, you and I are both old enough to remember that.
I remember that.
And before he went back. And it was at a technology fair at the time. I was at the University of Oregon. And I walked into the fair and he was all alone at a table, because back then he was a pariah. He had been fired by Apple. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. And I thought, what a great opportunity. I was using a Macintosh at the time, and here's the guy that kind of stewarded that through. So we were having a conversation, and Jobs was the kind of person that if you were having a conversation, you never had to worry about what you were going to say, Rick.
You weren't going to get a chance.
No. Yeah. But he asked me this question, and at the time I didn't realize how profound it was. He said, do you know the difference between Bill Gates and myself? And I wanted to say, Gates has a job. But I bit my tongue, and he said, Bill Gates believes people need to adapt to technology. And I believe technology needs to adapt to people.
Oh.
And in there, yeah, you just got it, right? That explains why those iPads are now in airplanes rather than monitors in the back of the seats. And that, if you look at any Apple product, particularly like the iPhone, it's all about what people need and value on a fundamental daily basis. And Jobs was, I don't think he was any smarter than anybody else, but he just recognized what was important, if you will, the value proposition, the big business purpose, and they had a revenue culture at Apple.
Yes, they did.
Mm-hmm.
And you're on to, again, it wasn't any of the things we talked about, but I can't stop myself.
I told you I was really looking forward to this conversation, Rick.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jobs to me was what this current generation going forward of the CEOs has to understand. And that is, your organization needs to be designed. We use the term from the buyer back.
Yes.
And instead of from headquarters out.
Right.
And, that's one that, I'll get all kinds of CEOs that we'll work with or talk to at conferences or speeches. They say, oh yeah, we're customer focused. And there's a difference between focusing on your target and being in the buyer's head as if you're the buyer, and you're dreaming their dreams, and you're feeling their fears, and you're building things to help their world be better. Mm-hmm. How do we help people make that transition?
Wow, boy, that is a huge challenge. But you reminded me of one of the greatest retailers of all time, Sam Walton. He said, Walmart didn't invent the retailing book. We stole the pages from everybody else, and we just put our cover on it. And Walton also was proud of, he said, nobody's been in more retail stores than I have. He walked into all the retail outlets to see, how did they set up a display? Where did they put certain items? What was how did things flow in the store? What kinds of people worked in the store? What kinds of people did it try to attract? And so it's just what you said, he wanted to connect with the experiences of the people who ultimately were going to be Walmart shoppers. How do we get people to understand that message? Boy, that would be a great challenge, Rick. May I ask you this? Do you have an idea?
Well, yes. And this is just my observation of the world. And I know there is some research that says in the future, companies aren't going to be as huge as a lot of them are today. They're going to be more focused on a smaller mission. And so part of the answer to me is for those companies that are going to have a smaller mission. That says today we start with a big purpose, and we say big purpose with capital letters on big and a capital P on purpose, that what we do creates value for a group of ideal buyers who can monetize the value we create. And when I see headquarters out companies, they create stuff that they want to tell buyers is going to be valuable, as opposed to the buyers or our Jobs was able to create value because he knew the people wanted it, even though they didn't know it yet.
Right.
Which is different, and Drucker said the purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. He didn't say buy a customer. He didn't say brainwash them. He didn't say pitch them to death.
Mm-hmm.
He said create them. And then he went a step farther and said the way you do that is your organization becomes so in tuned in the buyer's world that in effect, the buyers, when you come to them, the buyer says, what kept you?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we have to start with that really passionate commitment to purpose,
Right.
that now it draws our employees who are as excited about the purpose as we are.
Mm-hmm.
And it also draws the buyers who are, which is what Jobs did.
Mm-hmm.
He brought buyers to him that said, why didn't you have an iPhone 2 years ago? And,
Right.
why didn't we do the music downloads before?
Mm-hmm.
And, so I also think the buyers are as much a part of the new culture as the employees and the ownership.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. Yeah, you're right. Jobs knew if he went out and said, would you like to buy an iPhone? People would say, what's an iPhone? I don't want it. But here's what Jobs knew. Did people want to make a phone call? Did people want to listen to music? Did people want to check their email? What if you could do that all with one device and put it in your pocket? Yeah.
And take pictures.
Yes. Yeah. Big picture. Just what you said, Rick. Big picture. Mm-hmm.
So,
and I'll give you another example. There's a drug company, perhaps you've heard of it, called Novo Nordisk.
yeah.
And they make they make a lot of different drugs, but one of their most successful is for insulin. And what they do, if you've ever been to their headquarters in North Carolina, is you walk down a hall and there's photographs. It's photographs of family members for the people who work in that building who have diabetes and are on insulin. So when those people walk in every morning, they're walking in to help make that person's life better, a family member. So when you talk about value, when you talk about meaning and purpose, big business purpose, yeah, and connecting with people, Rick, I think you're really onto something critical there.
Now, one of the other things, this actually was in our question group.
I did write out answers.
When we work with clients, and we were at Sun Microsystems 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
So we're often there a long time. But if I don't bring up the question of how do you measure your transfer of value to buyers who are eager to pay for it, nobody will ever talk about transferring value.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about, well, we made a cool product, or we've got a new service, or what's our pricing, or how are we going to market, but nobody consciously has a conversation about the value that we are planning to transfer, because we know there's a group of people out there whose world will be better when they get
Mm-hmm.
this.
Right.
Do you experience any of that? Either people intentionally, it sounds like, some of the NBA things you're talking about, they're trying to intentionally figure out how we transfer value.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But
I think one of the biggest roadblocks to that, Ed, that perspective is how do we transfer, Rick, sorry, I was thinking of Bed Bastion. When transferring value is that we develop habits. And so we have this habit of running an organization, and pretty soon we're like a hamster on a wheel, and we forget there's a bigger purpose in mind. There's a bigger value we need to deliver. And how do you get people off that wheel? Because sometimes that wheel gets comfortable. This is what I do on a daily basis, day in and day out, and especially leaders constantly putting out fires. And, I speak to a lot of emerging leadership groups, especially through an organization called Vistage. And one of the things that we try to teach them is how to say no. that you have to understand what your priorities are. And if you say yes to something that doesn't help you meet those priorities, what you're really doing is distracting yourself. You're sinking your own ship. And there are ways to say no to people that don't put them off.
Right.
Let's be honest. Most people in leadership roles love people. They love their organization. They love what they do, and they don't want to be negative to anybody. And so, but you need to learn to say no in certain ways so you have time to focus on what you need to focus on. Again, the big picture has to always be front and center.
I love that, because from a revenue standpoint, we know that the greatest referral source is a customer that you said no to correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you say no to somebody, when they're standing there wanting to hand you money, they're asking you to do a project, and you explain to them that while you'd love to help them, that's not your core business.
Right.
That's not where you create the greatest value. And if you then refer them to who you think does do that, then all of a sudden, a couple of things happen. One, they trust you completely.
Yep.
Because they were standing there wanting to give you money and you said no.
No.
So they'll refer anybody to you because they know you won't take advantage. And when you told them what you really do, they now have a better idea of your core business than most of your customers.
I had thought of number two. Number one always comes up because it's the quality of your character that in large part is going to determine the quality of your leadership. People, whether they're external customers, if you will, or internal employees, if they can't trust you, the relationship will never, ever go anywhere. So that's a key point. But I love the second point you brought up. I hadn't considered that. That's a good one.
Because customers only know what you did for them.
Yes.
And, and I don't know that we talked about this, but I've been part of Vistage for 20 years. So,
oh, no, I did not know that.
Yeah. So, but customers only know what we do for them. And if I'm a speaker, when I speak at Vistage, they just think of me as a speaker. They don't realize we've even been in the consulting business for 30 some years, and we're in the intellectual property business. They don't know those things.
No.
And so they just think of me as a speaker. And while that's fine, that's not ideal, because if they value what we're talking about, there are other ways we could help if they just knew those.
Yes.
And so,
and one of the things that you said is you have a conversation with the people, and I want to buy this from you. I'm really not the person you should be buying this from. This person probably could do you better. I've done a service for you. I agree with you, Rick. That's tremendous.
And part of that also that people don't always think about is that person who came to you and said they wanted this, when you explain to them why that's not your core, but you'll refer them to somebody else, sometimes they didn't have the same language you had. And what they really asked for wasn't what they really needed.
Right.
And so when you explain to them what you really do, they go, oh, wait a minute, that's what I really want.
Right.
And if you don't do it that way, you never get the chance to meet them where you really both want to go.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think we could go on forever, but
I agree.
Let me ask just a final compound question.
All right.
What advice do you have for organizations who are in this this transition time where black swan events occur, technology is exploding, the economic part of the world's trying to catch up with the technology and the black swans. So for the leaders, what advice do you have? And then the other question is for employees, to help them pick the right organizations to work in, to identify the right leaders before they sign up. Do you have any advice for them as well?
For the leaders, when you talk about a tumultuous time, that's where opportunities lay. And the best leaders will be able to identify the opportunities and be able to take advantage of them. And it's incumbent on them, once they do that, to do two things. One is they have to communicate their vision, if you will, or what you call the big business purpose. And then I think they need to get the input from the team to say, how do we do this? I'm open. I want to hear ideas, because you know what, Rick? No one of us is smarter than all of us. And I'm not the first one to say that. And so the great leaders don't mind giving credit, because they're more focused on the outcome than they are the recognition.
Yes.
As far as employees, and you and I were talking about this earlier, I mean, we're in a time of big resignation, right? I mean, there's 11 million jobs currently available in the United States, and people are quitting at an unprecedented rate. What are they going to do? And I think that's an important question. And if you're going to join an organization, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur and you're going to form your own teams, then go with answer A. But if you're looking to join an organization, I would say join one that listens to you. They may not follow everything you say, but at least they listen to you and they consider your ideas, because that's an organization you can grow in. That's an organization that will respect you. And that's an organization that will allow you to develop your talents, your special, unique gifts. And ultimately, hopefully that'll lead to a higher salary, but even more importantly, it's going to lead to a career of satisfaction. And I think that's one of the big purposes. At the end of the day, we all want to be quote unquote rich, but I think even more importantly, we want to be happy.
Amen. And I love, if I tie those two things together, part of what I heard, which is something that we talk about all the time, is if they're listening to you and the CEO is willing to take advice from their team,
yes,
that's how you continuously improve. I mean,
right.
that's almost the definition of a long-term thriving organization.
Yep.
That you have smart people who can communicate to the top, and the top is willing to support them in transitions or additions or modifications to the organization.
Yeah.
Both to fulfill purpose and to survive and thrive, so everybody does have that career opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So
may I share one more story with you, Rick, that kind of makes that point, at least from my perspective? You know, I study coaches.
Yep.
And one of my dearest friends has coached in 6 Olympics. It was our head women's swim coach at the Beijing Games. The first year he was on the coaching staff, and I believe they went to Australia. It was back in the Sydney Games, maybe even before then. So Jack asked me the question. He says, you know, I'm going to be around all of these great coaches. How will I really know the true great coaches from the wannabes or the posers?
Yep.
And I said, Jack, watch for the coaches who ask questions, then listen to answers. And he says, well, why does that make them so great? And I said, because they will understand what's in the heads of their athletes. They don't coach a sport, they coach a person. And great coaches know their people. And this is what it allows them to do. It allows them to know what to say to that athlete, when to say it, how to say it, and when to say nothing at all. And it's understanding your people that makes the difference in leadership.
Yep. No,
Thank you for setting me up for that one.
Oh, I love that story, and that very consistent with the kinds of work that we do as well, and the information we try and transfer to other people. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. And thank you for being here today. This has been the hardest part of today is stopping. But so I think this has been great. I thank you, and maybe we get to do it again sometime.
I'd love to, Rick. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I thank all of you for joining us today, and hopefully you got as much out of it as I did. And we're back twice a month, every month, on the Living a Revenue Culture. Thanks.